I'm Danielle Gagne from Commercial UAV News, and today I'm following up with Matt Fanelli, Director of Strategy and Operations at Skyward, a Verizon Company, about some of the topics that came up during our May 13th webinar, Is the World Ready for Drone Delivery? Welcome back, Matt.
Thanks for having me, Danielle. It's good to be on the call.
Great to have you. So some of the questions that we weren't able to get to in the webinar was, what are the current capabilities of 4G LTE connectivity for enabling drone delivery, and how might that change or improve when 5G comes into play?
It's important to start that conversation with where connected devices are today with respect to drones. And we've partnered with a number of different companies to enable their drones to be connected directly to the network, especially in preparation for the beyond visual line of sight deployments that they hope to get to at scale. And with any new technology, Verizon approaches it from a stakeholder perspective, where they're trying to work closely, not just with the various ecosystem participation, the technology that goes into the network, the technology that exists and integrates into the drone OEMs themselves, and with the regulators. And by balancing each of those stakeholders' needs, we get to these commercial solutions that help enable our end customer use cases. For 4G today, we're already seeing those system enablers that Verizon and Skyward bring to bear help with some of our drone delivery partners. And there are a lot of exciting things that some of the drone delivery companies that we had on the webinar are doing today, as well as a number of others that have made quite a bit of news, especially in our coronavirus pandemic new normal. I think that that's the kind of use case that we're helping to make a reality, and it's the kind of use case that has long been one of the big promises of drones themselves. For 5G, it's an extension of a lot of the same tools and the same kinds of technology that 4G is enabling presently. With 5G, there are a lot of additional benefits that the new networks and the new radio rollouts are going to offer. Things like faster upload and download times, more reliable connections, more dense nodes on which the drones can process, transfer, and manage data. And for drone delivery, that means in places that have the kind of dense 5G deployments that we're seeing Verizon roll out in cities around the country, those places will be able to serve new kinds of operations in new ways. And that's some of the exciting work that we get to work on here at Skyward, bringing the aviation stakeholders to the new technology that Verizon is deploying.
So can you talk a little bit further about what some of those new deployments are looking like and how the drone industry is maybe imagining what that could look like for their future?
There's a lot of things that we look at in the technology, a lot of those enablers. When you have orders of magnitude more data that you can transfer and process at really, really fast speeds, that opens up things like being able to do drone deconfliction and routing, automated, digitized, and at the edge. So that is to say, doing those kinds of applications a lot faster. It's important to note that some of those things are still a ways away for a lot of reasons. There's certainly the supply chain issues with, this is hardware we're working with, and hardware's timelines for development are definitely longer. We need to make sure that the best-in-class chipsets get integrated into the right drones that are going to operate in those same paradigms, and that it matches with the operational deployments of the 5G. I will say that we get to play with some really, really cutting edge tools at Skyward, and some of our R&D department have already put some of those 5G capabilities into practice. And it's one of the goals that we have in working with some of our OEM partners, is to make sure that they're aware of what some of those capabilities are and that they can give input into that future state. There are also some interesting areas where the new radio may be able to enhance um, traditional aviation and even in some cases some of the other parts of the drone market. This isn't to say that 4G is going away. We view these as different tools in the toolbox, some of which are really good for some applications, and others will rely on the already best in class reliable 4G LTE network for a really long time. So it's more about what are the specific needs for customers, what are the technology enablers that we can bring to the table, and then how do we bring those together as fast as we can meet those customer needs.
Awesome. So you kind of hinted at this. There's a relationship that drone companies can have with telecoms that maybe we haven't been really um, promoting in, as much as we could. So what is the future relationship between telecoms and the commercial drone industry? And is it important that these telecoms work closely with the drone industry in order to enable it to move forward with projects similar to 5G, but probably other things that are happening within the telecom world?
As with a lot of other industries, Verizon is often one of those key enablers. We are Our networks have proved to be indispensable in connecting families, as we've done in our traditional sense. We've got a ton of press and I think a lot of accolades, rightly so, for Verizon's approach to things like the coronavirus pandemic. And in the drone ecosystem, we're also one of those enabling partners where you need to connect your data reliably. That's something that Verizon is exceptionally good at. And for drone delivery, it's a new kind of a paradigm, right? That's not the same thing as having a cell phone on the ground where you're making a phone call. But as we've seen with the transition from the traditional copper line based wired networks into the cell phone world and now into the smartphone world, Verizon is exceptionally good at managing and transferring that data. For the drone specific industry, we've approached it in a way where it's about bringing the right conversations together. What are the service requirements for drones? How are they the same and how are they different than for our terrestrial based users? What are the constraints that the aircrafts can live with? What are the considerations from the FAA or from the FCC? And how can we bring that best in class network to the kinds of commercial drone operations, especially with drone delivery, that we want to enable? And that does require partnership. That requires being at the table. And it's not something that we talk about that much. It's not something that we necessarily promote, but we're at the table in a lot of these conversations, whether it's with the FAA. We're on the Drone Advisory Committee. We have worked with a number of different programs at NASA and with the FAA. And though being a part of those conversations, I think brings out what are all of the different problems to be solved, what are all the challenges that we need to face, and then providing some real guidelines for how we're going to get through them. I think that the remote identification conversation is a really good illustration of this. This is something that we've been working with the FAA on for years, and I think it's telling that Verizon and another telecommunications carrier were both chosen as members of the implementation cohort. That's a recognition that the technologies represented by our companies in the telco industry are ones that are incredibly important enablers for the drone ecosystem as a whole.
So you mentioned the cohort, that's a really good point. Congratulations, by the way, for being part of that. Can you talk a little
Thank
bit
you.
about? Cool. Can you talk a little bit about what the goal is to come out of that cohort? What Skyward's role in that is going to be?
Our goal with the cohort is very similar to our goal with the low altitude authorization notification, or LANC capability. And it's to enable airspace access and drone flights for our commercial customers. It's the same principle holds true for remote identification. And I think that the FAA shares in that goal. Our ideal scenario is that we work really quickly and closely with the FAA and the other cohort members to develop a system for remote identification that for us works in a network-based context that promotes the principles of universal traffic management, and that ultimately gets our customers flying more in more ways in more places. And that absolutely applies to the drone delivery context and applies to the beyond line of sight area of the industry focus. And um, I don't think that the FAA is making any promises on timeline, which is probably a good thing from their perspective. But we certainly are bringing resources to bear to make sure that this system works for our end users with a minimum of headache and hassle, that it does all of the things that the various FAA and law enforcement stakeholders need, and that we're going to be able to implement this as soon as possible. Our hope is that we come out of this with new ways for operators to comply with the upcoming NPR or the upcoming final remote ID regulation, and that they're able to quickly pivot from the kinds of operations that they're doing today into the more advanced, complex operations of the future.
Fantastic, very exciting. So, as a UTM provider, you get a lot of data from drone pilots. One of the questions that came out of the webinar was about dealing with the cyber risks associated with drone delivery and mitigating those risks. Can you speak to any of that?
Yeah, when we talk about the data and the cybersecurity concerns in the drone ecosystem, I think sometimes these issues get conflated. There are the sort of data security and privacy controls for the drone operators themselves. So the commercial entities that are out there collecting interesting data, whether it's on their agricultural field, their delivery routes, or their industrial inspections, they collect a lot of data, and managing that data is one of the key challenges for the industry generally. But sometimes we also conflate that with the sort of public's perspective on privacy and security, and some of those concerns can get conflated. I think that for us, data security for our customers is of paramount importance, and it's one of the things that we are glad that the FAA and that the industry as a whole is continuing to put a lot of effort into kind of defining it and defining what cybersecurity means in this context. What are the best practices and ways in which we can implement safety and security of that data, and making sure that that is clear to all of the people along that whole value chain. For things like remote identification, I think that it's really important to look at the scope of information that's collected, that information is sufficiently protected along the whole chain, not just from the onboard the drone itself, but also in transit to either the LTE network or whatever other UTM service that you use, and that it's adequately protected by the FAA. For those folks who see this that are familiar with the Lance process, this is another area that the FAA has put a lot of effort into, defining exactly what level of security is required both on the FAA's treatment of that data side and in industry. And I think it's going to be a very similar conversation here. We're highly supportive of robust privacy protections for any PII, any non-public information, including the sort of trade secret level information that some of our customers are out collecting every day. That needs to be adequately protected, and there are a number of different efforts underway across the industry to make sure that those data are protected sufficiently. One of the just quick side notes is that we're actively participating on a Consumer Technology Association standards group that helped write some of the components for the ASTM remote ID standard. And we're currently working on some frameworks for cybersecurity as well. So we hope that these kinds of standards get applied from a lot of the learnings in other industries in software and hardware and telecommunications, and we can bring them to the safety and security of drone data as well.
It's great to hear. So the vision for drone delivery has been mostly about getting items delivered directly to someone's doorstep. How do you think the airspace will be used in the case of drone delivery? Will there be certain routes or channels, like roads or cars, or will it have to be a little bit more dynamic than that, requiring a more sophisticated way to plan and execute delivery routes on a day-to-day basis?
Well, Danielle, I'll challenge the premise a little bit on this one. I think that the end user use cases for drone delivery are incredibly important, and they're some of the best examples of drone technology that we've seen, at least in these early stages of the drone delivery market. But as we talked a little bit about in the webinar, and that we work with some other folks that are pretty active in the business to business space, where it's not just about delivering to the suburban household or into an urban environment, but it's also these slightly larger hub and spoke models where the drones can be a big enabler in some of the business enabled shipping as well. And in either case, there are a ton of applications for universal traffic management in the dynamic control and allocation of airspace. One of the interesting conversations that we had a while ago when we were talking about this internally was how limiting roads were. There's a classic business school study about one of the delivery companies doing an analysis of what's the most efficient way for them to deliver goods in that last mile traveling salesman problem. And that one of the challenges was that trucks spent a lot of time waiting to turn left because they would have to go across traffic, and then they're idling, and if they're idling, they're not delivering, and if they're idling, they're using gas. And this particular company found that it was more efficient overall to always have them turn right because that was an easier turn to make. And that kind of efficiency gain had a substantial impact on their overall business model. When you take another step back or a step up and you look at the way that drones can enable that same kind of an idea, a small efficiency gain for one truck, and then you extrapolate that out to all of the deliveries that those trucks make every day, you start to see that having access to the sky and access to routes that can be more direct than what the roads allow, that's a huge enabler. And it's why you see the big giants in delivery really excited about drones and putting a lot of effort and technology into the delivery market. That, I think, we're going to get to the point relatively soon, and we hope as soon as possible, that there will be this dynamic access for airspace, because at that point we are solving a problem that is, now we've gotten to this point where deliveries are so efficient, drones are being deployed all over the city, they need a way to interact. And that at its heart is universal traffic management, that digitization of the air traffic and the ability to look at these nodes on the network doing something that previously was impossible. It's one of the reasons why we're so excited about what we're doing at Skyward. And I think we've harped on this for a while now, but it hasn't gone unnoticed that Lance was one of the very first building blocks toward that future. Right now, it's not an airspace reservation system. It's still in the paradigm of keeping air traffic separated from drone traffic. And that's where we are today, both on the policy front and on the technology front. But that is a first step forward in seeing how technology can be used to identify what drones are in what airspace, make sure that those drones are talking to each other through this kind of universal traffic management system. And it will absolutely be key for the full integration of the airspace.
Fantastic. And I'm thinking about back in Commercial UAV Expo, and we had Bala Ganesh from UPS talk, and we saw the video of the UPS truck with the drone on top, flying off from the top of that and doing a delivery while the other person continues on to an easier route, and just being able to send that off into rural regions, making those efficiencies. And so I'm glad you brought that up. My final question today is, what are some of your final thoughts on how the 5G network can grow to support the UAV commercial deployment?
I think there's a couple of things that we're most excited about. One is this is a transformational technology. And as we've seen with other transformational technologies, it's hard from where we sit in time today to say all of the different things that they're going to be enabled to, that they will enable in the future. We get excited about some aspects of it for our customers right now, things like the payload data transfer and some of the enabling features of 5G and of multi-access edge compute that might be able to take some of that processing of data and analytics that comes off the drone and be able to do it faster, which means getting insights into customers' hands in real time. But we're sure that there are lots of other applications that we haven't thought of that customers are going to be delighted by and that are going to be big enablers in the future, whether it's the ability to do efficient obstacle detection and avoidance, whether it's an ability for 5G to enable the densification of air traffic by another order of magnitude, if they're able to process and make those exchanges for those airspace reservations on smaller and smaller volumes of airspace. That is a really exciting kind of a application that I think some people have just started to begin to think about, but are going to be a real big deal as these technologies roll out together. And I think finally, we're just really excited about the commitment that Verizon is making in this space and the reception that we've seen from some of our partners. There's not a week goes by that we don't get another call from someone that's interested in how is 5G going to help my drone program, and what an OEM saying, here's my specifications and this is the use case we're thinking about. Is this possible? And those are the things that we at Skyward love to tackle, and that we're proud to sit with our network colleagues in Verizon and make those things happen. So, I think 5G is another in the long list of technology developments that have helped make the drone ecosystem one of the most exciting ones in the world today. And we're excited to keep working on it.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for meeting with me today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too as well, and to all the folks at Commercial UAV. We appreciate you and are glad for all the wonderful things that you guys are doing.
Much appreciated.